With this moment going global, we will host, every time we host a very important guest from somewhere in the world. And today with us we have Tim Mutton, who is the founder of Blacksheep and is calling us from England. So hi Tim, hi again. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Francesco. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm really honoured to be participating. Thank you.
Thank you, and we were honored as well. There's many people here in this place that will be very interested in listening what you can tell us about this topic that we have been covering. We are covering right now, which is the encounter. So somehow the mix between hospitality on one side and food and beverage on the other, which is booming, like as our friends from CBRE were telling us in the beginning. So just a few words, Tim, to introduce you. You know, I really love every time to spend a couple of words to introduce our honored guests. Tim is the founder of Blacksheep, the studio that I've just mentioned, a creative studio, a collective of strategists, designers, thinkers, and doers fully immersed in the world of hospitality, brand, and experience design. Always believing in the power and value of being a strategy-led studio with a collaborative and independent culture, Tim and his team have helped many leading hospitality brands to challenge, define, and create groundbreaking concepts with the dynamic talents across branding, interior design, and architecture. So the different feeds over, obviously. And over 2 decades of experience, a team across hospitality design business, Blacksheep is now renowned as a global design firm. In fact, the first question that I'd like to ask you, Tim, is as follows, because we know that your studio has developed projects of absolute prestige like St. Regis, Astro Restaurant in San Francisco. We've seen a couple of the pictures and we will see them thanks to you obviously as well, on one side. And on the other side, here in Milan as well, I'm a client. We are with my kids. We know you also for the modern and pop flavor of such a brand like Five Guys. So you have quite a wide range of experience. Can you take us through the inspiration journey that leads the work of yours, of course, and of Blacksheep Studio?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And thank you for such a fantastic introduction. And you're right. You know, I've been in this industry for well over 20 years now. And to answer your question, in terms of the inspiration journey that I've been over those 20 years, it's something I get asked a lot in terms of Tim or Blacksheep, what is it that you do? You know, what is it that Blacksheep does, Tim? And I guess in that 20 years, it took me a bit of time to actually get to a point where I could actually clearly define exactly what the business does. And in many ways, you know, how I like to lead the business. And it comes down to something very simple. And I think you have to keep things simple within the F&B world. And certainly within hospitality, I've learned over 20 years that actually if you keep things simple, then they'll do well, they'll be successful. And it just really comes down to this single point that I've worked out, that Blacksheep are just translators of your brand. You know, that's what we do. But what does that mean? You know, what does it mean when we're here as your translators? Essentially, it comes down to making sure that we can communicate your brand as strongly and as clearly as possible. And that means affecting everything within the totality of the guest experience. So everything they come into touch with, we will affect, we will change. And you've used those great sort of brands in part of your introduction and part of the question in regards to sort of Five Guys and St. Regis, and also you talked about our values and in the introduction in terms of, you know, how we really love what I call the 3 C's, which is challenge, change, and then create or creativity. Essentially, we use that creativity to solve problems, and we love working with brands that fundamentally have to change, but they've got a challenge in relation to how they wish to change. So if you look at the work we did with Five Guys initially, that was 10 years ago when they knocked on our door, and they said to us, look, we want to come from the US and we want to enter into the European market. And sort of, I guess back in my old days of being a designer, I would have been kind of quite reactive to that and taken the brief and gone straight into kind of designing. But Black Sheep has become so much more strategical, and it's about kind of understanding, what the need state of that brand is in order to successfully launch itself within the UK initially, and then we've gone to France, Germany, and as you said, now Italy, all the way across Europe. We're even now taking the brands in terms of our European design standards, we're taking it back into the US. So a lot of that strategic work was really just analyzing the brand and thinking around how we need to adapt and change the brand, using design as our tool to make positive change in order for it to kind of successfully not only go from the first store to, we've now got 250 stores. In that 10 years, Black Sheep has done 250 stores. So, we've affected that brand by just being great communicators and translators in relation to that experience. With St. Regis, it's completely opposite in terms of where it sits, because it's within the asset as a hotel asset. And that's why I love the work that we do at Black Sheep, because it's working not only on the high street from a retail perspective, but you're also taking those cues and those thoughts and affecting assets like the F&B within hotels. And the work that we had to do there was completely polar opposite. It was really that, how did we pivot that asset? I think Roberto was mentioning it earlier. I love what he had to say, and I picked up again, that whole thing around, F&B has to be profitable. It has to really work really well. And I mentioned it earlier around the margins in F&B. They're not as much as everybody thinks. They're quite tight, and they're even, as we now we're dealing with escalating costs and inflation. It's quite tough out there. Again, Roberto mentioned that in our report, but we had to pivot that property into profitability. And again, being strategic, what we did is we had to close the restaurant down, and then we had to take the view. And I'm really big into this in the moment around, we'll talk about some trends that are happening in our world about really blending the space. So you take the bar, you take the lounge, you've got to have the breakfast function. And what you do is you blend those all together. Yeah. So what you're not doing is you're not having separate thresholds with separate outlets with lots of different staff, and the intensity around that, you reduce the intensity and you create more efficiency. And that's what we had to do there. So that's kind of been the design journey. The design journey really in the 20 years is just how we translate being strategic, meeting whatever the goals and the client's needs are in regards to making sure that they're able to be successful through whatever their change values are, and obviously just challenging them along the way to make sure that we can kind of problem solve just using creativity.
It's clear that listen to your story, your take, it's clear that the storytelling part, because you said there's the importance of giving a strong message, of being able to help the brand with the message he really needs to deliver. That's part, the brilliant and important part of your job. And I'm asking you also something that emerged here, because Ettore was saying from Accor that, I asked him, what's your take on the future of this marriage between the hospitality and the F&B? Because it seems like now it's booming, but probably like if it reached an apex, that it's hard to believe in the future will be the same. In fact, he says that probably in the future only let's say a little bit, the strongest will survive. There'll be a kind of a selection. So what's your take on the international, because you travel so much, you see that it has a future. Do you think this importance of F&B will have a future?
Absolutely. I believe it will have more and more of a future. I think it's incredibly, as far as F&B is concerned, I think it's one of the number one requirements. It doesn't matter if you look at the high streets, even in the UK or European, we have a lot of retail that's converting to social entertainment, particularly now. That's a big boom. There's F&B within that component. We are able to get people out of their houses and being online and on their tablets and into F&B venues. Again, you look at the retail landscape, it's ever changing, which is the greatest thing about F&B. It's pretty fast paced in terms of how that happens. So, and then within the hotels, I'm a strong believer that it's a fundamental. You've got people sleeping, of course, that's the model, that you've got rooms, but you have to feed them, and they have to have some form of sustenance. And actually, it becomes a great social driver for hotels. It creates the energy, and it needs to be there. I know there are brands where they look to simplify it, but they still have it. And Moxie was talked about earlier. I love that concept. But essentially, you get to check in and have a coffee. Why not? Why can't we have a multi-dynamic experience within our venues? And that's the same within what we're doing from an F&B retail perspective. So the fact is you can go, now engaging with bowling, drinking, like playing some sort of technology-led darts game, as a group. It's so fast-paced. It's changing so dramatically, and also now with the buoyancy of technology. I think, it's a kind of human fundamental, food and beverage. I don't think it's ever going to go away. I had one CEO who always said to me, he said, we're always kind of worried that if people can cook as well as at home, then they may not keep coming to restaurants. But that's still not. In fact, anything we're now got residential, they don't have kitchens. So if you go to New York or any even in some parts of London where spaces are premium, you're probably eating out more than you are having anything at home. So it's not going away.
Of course. You've already mentioned a couple of them actually, but can you, just one last question to hear from your experience, is there any new trends all over the world that you foresee as something that will become very specific and very interesting? Well, now you just mentioned the dart, the technology applied, and it's very inspiring. But is there anything you really bet you will really?
Yeah, I've got four really great insights, and these are not, there's a difference between trends and trendy, right? And I tend to go and sort of call them insights, but I think I was just trying to get my slides to go. There we go. So I'm big into this functionality within F&B. I'm sure your panelists are kind of quite aware of this, but I'm really into the micro-personal experiences, and that you were talking about kind of storytelling and narratives. I actually think we're moving now away from this kind of demand for stories and narratives within F&B, and I think it's really about kind of analyzing, understanding where we can go with the experiences, but making things a lot more personal. I love this thing that we can go into restaurants and we can get asked as guests, like, what if we have any allergies. So, and then, we go around the table, and then surely, and absolutely right, there are those that will clearly say that they've got allergies. But I think we need to go further and deeper within hospitality. So it's a bit like, people saying, how are you? But instead of that, it's like, how do you feel? And then we can attune our experiences in order to improve people's day, depending if they're happy or if they're sad or if they're feeling a bit lonely. I think dealing with people on a very personal level is going beyond just asking them how they are, and basically if they've got any allergies. I think we in F&B and within hospitality can go deeper with that. It's the same in terms of if we've got extroverts or introverts. Not everybody will want to sit at a bar, particularly if you're an introvert. I mean, how do you deal with that? So it's really thinking about how do we deal with the functionality within experience, and then going deeper and dealing with that on a more of a personal level. And data will allow us to do that. I think data is something that can drive our experiences, and particularly brands, either hard or soft brands, to kind of tailor experiences for their individual guests. So that's particularly one that I'm really into. Another one is this whole thing around, particularly within the marketplace, and food. And we're seeing a huge shift between meat and plant-based products. I mean, even today I saw an ad for plant-based butter. It's an ongoing issue because I think it gives out something like 60% of greenhouse gases. But I've been witnessing some extraordinary things within the industry. Now they've developed like a tuna that's plant-based, imagine it, and they've also developed like an animal-free dairy ice cream. I mean, I just I've tasted some of this stuff. For light, it just takes you getting used to it. But actually, potentially, would you be substituting this stuff on a menu? I think so. So it's a very interesting place in terms of where things are going. And then two of my favorites, which I think we all have to look out for over the next 2 years, is this whole thing around AI. I've done a lot of conferences in this year, quite a few in the US in particular, where I think things are they're at a different pace than what happens in Europe. And now we're even thinking that touchscreens in F&B retail, they're just they're redundant. They're outdated already. It's a bit like your old Sony Ericsson, and then they're having a smartphone. It's that comparison that you're going into a space and using your finger and touching a screen and sending the order to the counter. I mean, it's super clunky. It's very slow. So now, we're really looking at how AI is developing itself in terms of, now we've got voice recognition and we're looking at using this particularly in F&B, retail, and airports, is that you can use voice recognition, and they can basically translate. Doesn't matter where you're from. If even now from Italian, you could order in Italian, and it can translate that out, and it also can remember. It can remember your voice. So this is just something super to watch. I think AI is just going to go crazy in terms of how we can implement it within F&B. And the last one, I think you mentioned it beautifully, one of your panelists did as well, as this whole thing around energy. We've got to start reducing consumption of energy in our F&B massively, and that's either from lighting or particularly kitchen equipment. We've seen a huge shift, particularly this year, a move away from gas into more electric. But then how do you deal with the electric component? You've got to be looking at the renewables. So even when we're looking at drive-throughs, we're looking at optimizing wind, particularly to kind of like compensate for in regards to energy consumption. Well, we can do that, but why can't we do that in our cities? Or why can't we do that on hotels? Now, hotels are something that's I'm quite passionate about. I'd love to analyze the energy consumption of hotels and think about how can we reduce that on every project over the next 2 to 3 years by a certain percentage in terms of particularly the F&B or the whole hotel itself. So I think, these are ones to really, really watch. They're super important, and they will, I think, enhance our experiences in F&B particularly.
Sounds great. Thank you, Tim, especially for these last 4 insights and business insights, which are very inspiring. And I think everyone now will start thinking about what we can improve, how can we somehow implement some of these ideas in a proper way on our hotels, on our F&B places, and so on. So, Tim Mutton from Blacksheep, thank you so much for being with us, and hope to see you soon, maybe here in Italy or somewhere else in the world.
Anytime. I've got a project in Rome. I think Rome was just talked to this, pipped Paris, absolutely on the RevPar. So we have a project we're doing a hotel there in Rome, which I'm really proud of. So I can meet you there anytime.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Thank you.